For 1,000 years, the ash has fallen from the sky, and nobody alive remembers a world without it. This is the story of the final empire. An immortal ruler has held this land for 1,000 years. His people call him a god, and in 1,000 years he has never once bothered to correct them. Under his rule, ash drifts down constantly from a sky that never quite shows the sun, settling on rooftops, on crops, on the shoulders of anyone unlucky enough to work outdoors for a living. At night, a strange mist rises and swallows the whole city, and ordinary people lock their doors and pretend it is not there, because everyone quietly agrees that something about the mist is not right, even though almost nobody says so out loud. Society here is split into two groups that barely count as the same species anymore. The nobility live behind tall stone walls, attend endless balls, and treat the empire as something they were simply born owning. The Ska are everyone else, a slave class, worked past exhaustion, starved when it is convenient, and killed without any real consequence, because killing a Ska is barely considered a crime worth mentioning. Rebellions against this order have been tried before, more than once, in more than one generation. Every single one failed completely. What survives of them now is mostly a lesson, repeated by parents to children. This is why nobody tries again. Scholars who still dare to study the old histories tell a strange story about how all of this began. That 1,000 years ago, a great darkness called the Deepness threatened to destroy the entire world, and that a chosen hero rose up to stop it and won. The man who tells that story today, from his throne, claims to be that very hero. Nobody living has any way to check whether that is actually true. Questioning it out loud has a way of ending badly for whoever asks. This is the story of the people who tried again anyway, and very nearly did not live long enough to find out if it was worth it. Years before any of this truly begins, a thief named Kelsier and his wife Mare are caught stealing from exactly the wrong nobleman. Instead of a quick execution, they are handed something the Empire considers worse. Hard labor in the pits of Hathson, a mining camp so brutal that almost nobody sentenced there survives it long enough to matter. Mare does not survive it. She is beaten to death in front of him. Something inside Kelsier simply breaks in that moment, and in the middle of that breaking, an ability wakes up inside him that has no business existing in a half-Ska thief at all. The full power of Allomancy, not one fragment of it, but every piece at once. Nobles call this rare combination a Mistborn, a title normally reserved strictly for pure noble bloodlines. A half-Ska convict is not supposed to be one. Kelsier does not particularly care what he is supposed to be. He kills the guards holding him. He walks out of the pits of Hathson alive, the only person anyone can remember ever managing that. For years afterward, he wanders the outer plantations of the Empire, quietly finding beaten-down Ska workers and planting a single idea in them that the Empire has spent 1,000 years trying to make sure nobody ever thinks. That the world could, in theory, be different than this. He does not have a full plan yet. He only has that one idea and a stubborn refusal to let it go. He also, quietly and deliberately, starts building himself into something bigger than one surviving thief. He lets stories about the man who walked out of Hathson alive spread and grow on their own, embellished a little more with every retelling, until Ska in villages he has never actually visited already know his name. In the capital city of Luthadel, a 16-year-old thief named Vin survives by one simple rule, drilled into her for years by an older brother who abandoned her the exact day he decided she had finally learned it well enough. Trust absolutely nobody, because everyone you trust eventually sells you out for something smaller than you'd expect. She has spent her entire short life proving that rule correct, over and over, usually the hard way. What nobody around her realizes, including Vin herself, is that she has been unconsciously using a sliver of the very same power Kelsier carries. Small, uncontrolled bursts of it have kept her alive in situations that should have killed her many times over. Soothing an angry crime boss's temper without ever understanding how she did it, sensing danger a half-second before it arrives, and made the criminals she works for deeply, understandably suspicious of her, in a way she has never had a name for. The man she currently works for has started wondering, quietly and dangerously, whether she might be some kind of hidden allomancer. In this city, that kind of suspicion tends to end in a knife, rather than a conversation. Kelsier finds her before she finds him. He recognizes immediately what she actually is. Not a low-level misting, limited to a single allomantic power like almost every other allomancer alive, but a full Mistborn, exactly like himself. It is vanishingly rare among pure-blood nobility. A starving Ska girl from the street is not supposed to be one of them at all. He takes her in anyway, and does something absolutely nobody in her entire life has ever bothered to do before. He starts teaching her on purpose, instead of simply using her and moving on. Vin waits, for weeks, for the betrayal her brother always promised her was coming. It does not arrive. She does not quite know what to do with that. Kelsier gathers the sharpest thieves, forgers, and manipulators he has ever worked with in one room, and only then tells them the actual plan, once it is far too late for anyone to simply stand up and walk out. This is not one more clever heist among many. The real goal is to collapse the entire final empire from the inside, break its economy completely, arm and secretly train a hidden army built out of Ska who have never held a weapon in their lives, and eventually somehow kill the immortal ruler who has sat on the exact same throne for a full 1,000 years without interruption. Most of the crew privately think this plan is going to get every single one of them killed before it is finished. A god emperor has ruled unopposed for 1,000 years. A handful of thieves in a rented shop hardly seems like the force history would pick to end that. Nobody actually leaves the table though, and by the end of the night, the impossible plan has quietly become the only plan anyone in that room is willing to work toward. Kelsier begins training Vin properly and seriously in allomancy, pushing and pulling on nearby metal to move objects, and sometimes people, burning specific metals to sharpen strength, speed, or the senses far beyond anything human. Each metal granting exactly one narrow ability. A Mistborn alone able to draw on every single one of them at will. Vin learns fast, faster than Kelsier expects. She has spent her whole life reading danger for a living. This, it turns out, is simply a far more precise version of the same skill she already has. The rest of the crew are professionals in their own right, each one carrying a single allomantic gift, the way most Ska never get to carry any at all. One who can calm or provoke a crowd's emotions from across a room, one who can hide the telltale traces of everyone else's powers from prying eyes, one whose enhanced strength makes him worth 3 ordinary men in a fight. None of them fully trust that this particular job is survivable. All of them show up to work on it anyway, morning after morning, because Kelsier has a way of making the impossible sound merely difficult. Part of the larger plan requires Vin to become someone she has never once been allowed to be. A noblewoman, welcomed politely into ballrooms she would once have been executed on sight for merely entering. An older Terra scholar named Sazed, endlessly gentle and endlessly patient with her, teaches her the manners, the posture, and the quiet unspoken rules of a class that has spent generations perfecting the art of looking down on people exactly like the one she actually is. At her very first ball, she is quietly terrified the entire evening, certain someone is about to see straight through the disguise and call for the guards. The gowns are heavier than any clothing she has ever worn, the conversation moves in unfamiliar, coded rhythms, and every polite smile in the room seems to be measuring her for a weakness. Instead, she discovers, almost to her own disbelief, that she is genuinely good at this. In the same instinctive way she has always been good at reading a room full of danger, just aimed at a much quieter kind of danger now. At one of these balls, she meets Elend Venture, the son of one of the most powerful noble houses in the entire city, and almost nothing at all like the rest of his class. He spends his evenings arguing about political philosophy instead of managing his family's fortune, shows up late to the events his own father insists matter enormously, and privately believes, in a way he almost never says out loud among his own peers, that the Empire's entire foundation might be completely indefensible. He also, unlike every other noble Vin has spent months learning to manipulate, seems to actually enjoy simply talking to her, without any angle behind it that she can find no matter how carefully she looks for one. That, more than his manners or his family name, is what unsettles her the most. Vin has spent her whole life being trained, first by her brother and then by hard experience, never to trust anyone at all. Around Elend, for reasons she cannot fully explain even to herself, she does not entirely manage to follow her own rule. The plan calls for deliberate chaos among the noble houses, so the crew manufactures exactly that. Forged letters slipped into the right hands, stolen documents leaked at the worst possible moment, carefully placed rumors, until the great houses of Luthadel start turning on one another in earnest, exactly as intended. Grand balls that once celebrated alliances now double as places where those same alliances quietly, publicly, fall apart. In the middle of the growing instability, Vin learns of a quiet plot to assassinate Elend before any of the chaos can touch him directly. She reaches him just in time and ends up fighting another Mistborn sent specifically to kill him, a noblewoman with training every bit as sharp as Vin's own. The fight is close, brutal, and fought entirely on nearby rooftops in the dark, blade and metal against blade and metal, 2 Mistborns burning the same handful of metals against each other in a fight that ordinary soldiers could never have followed. Her opponent does not survive it. Meanwhile, Kelsier's own brother, Marsh, has been living a far more dangerous double life than any of them realized at first. Infiltrated deep inside the Steel Ministry itself, the religious institution that enforces the Lord Ruler's law and produces the terrifying inquisitors who hunt down unauthorized allomancers across the Empire. Then, without warning, all contact with him simply stops. No message, no sign, nothing. The crew fears the worst almost immediately. Nobody quite says it out loud around Kelsier, but everyone is privately thinking the exact same thing. Marsh is very likely already dead, and it is entirely possible the Ministry now knows considerably more about their plan than any of them would like. Digging carefully through records nobody was ever supposed to see, Kelsier gets his hands on something remarkable. A private journal, centuries old, written in a plain, uncertain, deeply human voice that matches absolutely nothing about the godlike ruler everyone across this empire has been taught to worship since the day they were born. He does not yet understand exactly what it means. He understands more than enough to know that something in the official history simply does not add up, and has not added up for a very long time. He reads the journal at night, alone, and says nothing about it to the crew for longer than he probably should, half hoping to find an answer before he has to explain the question. Around the same time, Kelsier starts quietly spreading a very specific rumor through the Ska underground, that a mysterious 11th metal exists somewhere. one capable of finally actually destroying the Lord Ruler for good. He does not entirely know if the rumor is true. Some nights, alone, he is not even sure he believes it himself. He has built entire legends out of less before, and knows better than anyone how easily a good story can outrun the facts underneath it. But a rumor like that does something that 100 careful sermons never could have managed. It spreads from safe house to safe house, from plantation to plantation, faster than anyone could have organized it on purpose. For the first time in 1,000 years, Ska's slaves across the entire city start quietly whispering to one another that the god who has always owned them might not be quite as untouchable as he insists he is. Hope, it turns out, spreads a great deal like fire once somebody finally strikes the first spark. Kelsier decides to hit the Lord Ruler exactly where it will hurt the most: the pits of Hathsin itself, the source of the Empire's entire supply of adium, one of the rarest and most valuable metals in all of Alamancy, and the same camp where Mare died, all those years ago. He attacks the mining operation directly and shuts it down completely in a single night. The Lord Ruler's answer is immediate, public, and deliberately cruel. Ska are dragged into the city square in large numbers and executed in front of crowds, meant as an unmistakable warning to anyone still quietly considering rebellion. Kelsier does not take the warning the way it was intended. He storms the execution site instead, to free every prisoner he can reach, fighting inquisitors along the way, hardened warrior priests, spiked through with metal and nearly impossible to kill through any ordinary means. He beheads one of them himself in the fighting, something almost nobody has ever managed before. And for one brief, exhilarating moment, it genuinely looks like he might actually win this outright. Then the Lord Ruler himself steps out to end it personally, and kills Kelsier without any particular effort at all, the way a man might swat aside something small and briefly annoying. The prisoners Kelsier came to free scatter into the mist, alive because of him. He is not alive to see it. It is only afterward, once the shock finally settles over the surviving crew, that the deeper truth comes out. Kelsier had planned this from the very beginning, long before anyone else in the room knew it. He never once expected to survive the ending of his own plan, and had quietly arranged, without telling most of them, for exactly this outcome to be possible. A martyr's death, delivered publicly, in full view of the very people he had spent years quietly trying to inspire, would accomplish something no speech, no rumor, no clever heist ever could. It would make the rebellion unstoppable, whether the Empire liked it or not. Somehow, in the chaos immediately following his death, Kelsier's body disappears from where it fell, replaced with something convincing enough to fool everyone who looks. Word spreads through the Ska slums within hours that the survivor of Hathsin has returned from death itself, exactly as the old stories always claimed he might. Nobody can definitively prove that it is not true. That uncertainty alone turns out to be more than enough. Open rebellion finally breaks out across every district of Luthadel at once. While the city burns behind her, Vin makes her own way into the Lord Ruler's palace to finish what Kelsier started and never got to complete. An inquisitor catches her before she gets close enough, and interrogates her while she is barely able to fight back, drained and wounded from everything that came before this moment. The Lord Ruler himself watches, unbothered, entirely certain of how this particular night is going to end. He has, after all, watched 1,000 years of rebellions end exactly this way. Then a new inquisitor bursts into the room without warning and turns immediately on the others, cutting them down instead of helping them. Something about his face, half hidden beneath the metal spikes driven through his skull, is unsettlingly, impossibly familiar. It is Marsh. Not dead after all, transformed, against his will, by the very organization he had been secretly spying on for months. But somehow, underneath all of it, still fighting for the right side when it matters most. His interruption buys Vin exactly the one moment she still needs. She burns the last of the strange, forgotten 11th metal that Kelsier left behind for her before he died, never having discovered what it actually did. And she sees, for one impossible instant, something nobody alive is supposed to see. The plain, unglamorous truth of who the Lord Ruler actually was, 1,000 years ago, before any of this began. Not the chosen hero the official religion has spent a millennium describing. A different man entirely, one who took a power, and an identity, and a destiny that were never actually his to take, from someone who deserved them a great deal more. That truth does not weaken him. His body is still nearly unkillable, healed instantly of anything that touches it, propped up for 1,000 years by enormous stores of youth and health he keeps locked away in the bracelets circling his wrists. It is Sazed who finally sees the actual answer, arriving at the last possible moment with nothing more impressive than a plain wooden spear. Vin tears the bracelets from the Lord Ruler's wrists with everything her allomancy can pull, cutting him off from the reserves that have kept him alive for 10 centuries. Without them, he starts aging in front of her, 1,000 years catching up to him all at once. The Lord Ruler is, at last, genuinely killable. Vin takes Sazed's spear and drives it straight through his heart. The final empire, a system deliberately built to last forever, falls in the space of a single, chaotic night. The rebellion Kelsier died to start succeeds. The god who ruled unopposed for 1,000 years is simply gone. Vin stands in the wreckage of an empire that had, until tonight, outlasted every single person who was ever born to oppose it. And standing beside her is Elend Venture, a nobleman who spent his whole comfortable life writing about a fairer world he never actually expected to live long enough to see. Neither of them fully understands yet exactly what they have done tonight, or what their victory may have quietly, invisibly undone along with it, far away, in places neither of them has thought to look yet. For tonight, in the middle of the ash and the smoke and the noise of a city finally breathing free air, that particular question can wait. Ska, who spent their entire lives being told they were worth less than the dirt they farmed, are tonight walking freely through streets that used to belong exclusively to the people who owned them. Nobody quite knows yet what comes after a god. Nobody in this city has ever had to figure that out before. Vine has spent her whole life believing, on principle, that trusting anyone eventually gets you killed. Tonight, at least, she is still alive, still standing, and still, against every instinct her brother ever drilled into her, willing to let one person stand this close beside her.